Foundation's education programme promotes understanding of the long struggle for human rights and against apartheid in South Africa. The African National Congress is the liberation movement that led that struggle. Its leader for almost 30 years was Oliver Reginald Tambo. Nelson Mandela's tribute at Oliver Tambo's funeral, 2nd of May 1993. A great giant who strode the globe like a colossus has fallen. A mind whose thoughts have opened the doors to our liberty has ceased to function. A heart whose dreams gave hope to the despised has forever lost its beat. The gentle voice whose measured words of reason shook the thrones of tyrants has been silenced. The 27th of October is the birthday of O.R. Tambo, President of the African National Congress from 1967 to 1991. 30,000 heard him speak in Glasgow in 1988 at the Mandela March for Freedom. In 1944, with Nelson Mandela and others, Tambo formed the ANC Youth League. In 1952, he joined Mandela to establish South Africa's first black law practice. He was imprisoned in 1956-1957. And in 1959, the South African apartheid government served him with a 5-year banning order. In 1960, the Sharpeville massacre by apartheid police set in train events that led to the ANC sending Tambo into exile to mobilise opposition to apartheid. He spent the next 30 years organising from Muswell Hill in London. This statue of him was unveiled there in 2019.
The ceiling of repression was broken in the early 70s, in part as a result of the actions by the ANC. For example, the clashes in what was then Rhodesia, in Wankie, where the ANC was involved together with Zimbabwean liberation forces. That opened the gates, and the people began to come out more boldly. This was in 1967, 68. So during the early 70s, there was a growing build-up, even within South Africa, because people had become more defiant. The enemy could not contain the determination of the people anymore. And so then you then began to get the mood of resistance and defiance, which the ANC had inculcated.
Lindiwe Mabuza was appointed by Tambo to ANC offices in Sweden in 1979 as ANC chief representative to the Nordic countries. She survived the bombing of the offices and became a member of the first democratically elected South African Parliament.
Well, I think what they both had in common, one, integrity. Cast iron integrity. They were both very, very principled. I think another thing is that, well, I knew OR much better than I knew Madiba. Always truthful. No reason to lie. He was self-sacrificing. He was seeing comrades as comrades and not like he was the president of the ANC. He never approached us as the president. He was a servant among servants.
Mac Maharaj, as a member of the banned South African Communist Party, worked secretly with Nelson Mandela. In 1964, he was imprisoned on Robben Island. While there, he secretly transcribed parts of Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom and smuggled it out of prison in 1976.
So consensus making as a mechanism of decision making in the ANC should be noted. And it is a very important one because it tries to bring everybody together. And that is one of the hallmarks of the Tambo era. He lived and led at a time when our movement could have disintegrated like so many other movements around the world when they were driven into exile. He had mastered the art of gathering the people as a flock to keep them marching in step, even if that step was not as dramatic as one would have wanted at that time.
Luli Kalinikos is well known for her writings on the formation of the South African working class. In 1992, she was commissioned to write Oliver Tambo's biography, Oliver Tambo, Beyond the Ngele Mountains.
So, of course, there is OR's comment quite early on, I think in 77, addressing an audience in Luanda when he said, "Comrades, if you think that the struggle is difficult, wait until getting to power." I said to him, you know, you're such an inclusive person, leader, and but I just can't help wondering, you're a deeply committed Christian, and yet you were able to embrace the Communist Party. These atheists, how did you do it? And his face lit up and he said, simple. It was their humanity. That's what they had in common. He said these communists were so dedicated to improving the lives of all the people, and this was what impressed him and felt we could work together.
Dennis Goldberg was sentenced with Mandela at the Rivonia trial and spent 22 years in prison. He was a patron of the Nelson Mandela Scottish Memorial Foundation.
Those kids transformed our struggle. They started leaving the country in droves, joined the African National Congress, demanded to be trained as soldiers, and Oliver Tambo, the leader, said, no, you go to school. We're going to need educated people to run our country. When you've done your schooling, you can choose to go to university or into the army, but you finish your school first. What foresight, what humanity.
O.R. Tambo at the United States National Press Club, 1987, answering a question on hard military and soft civilian targets.
In the South African context, it's really difficult to make the distinction. If you define civilian to mean any civilian, black or white, then the current practice, as far as the regime is concerned anyway, is that there is no difference between hard and soft civilians. There has never been in the South African practice. Because every time they kill, they're killing a civilian. The children of Soweto were civilians. The massacre of Nobuhle was a massacre of civilians. Mamelodi, women, civilians, all the time, civilians. When a policeman stands up, sees a child in front of him, aims his gun, pulls the trigger, and the child drops down dead. He has killed a civilian. But he is not called a civilian. At best, he is called a black. So black becomes something which you can kill at will, not civilian. The ANC has a history of more than 20 years, which I've referred to, of avoiding killing people we have issued instructions in an important annual policy statement this year. We have said our people must refuse to attack civilians, whether those civilians are black or white. But we are the only ones to refer to blacks as civilians. And we do not understand in a way why. Everybody talking about civilians is thinking of white civilians. If you knew the number of civilians who are being killed every day by the Pretoria regime, you wouldn't ask the question. The struggle must, at all stages, be not only sustained, but intensified. It constitutes a form of pressure. The struggle does. Therefore, we must intensify this pressure. We think what has come inadequately was the other form of pressure, the external pressure, the sanctions. I think a combination of these two can bring about the result we seek. The less there are external pressures, the more you have to rely on internal pressures. The more, therefore, the conflict within will have to be escalated. But the more pressures you bring from without, the less does it become necessary for you to intensify and escalate before you get the desired result. So we have seen these two as complementary. And in our view, external pressures are lacking behind, although in that connection, we are gratified by the lead which the United States has taken in this matter. And we feel that the rest of Western Europe are letting us down, letting everybody down, letting all opponents of apartheid down by not at least measuring up to the level reached by the United States. It is for that reason that we consider it necessary to ask the Security Council to deliberate on this question and take a decision, making at least the United States packet of sanctions compulsory. That will save us the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of black and white South Africans before we settle down to a bit of sanity and talk about how to live together as South Africans.
What would be the maximum that could be gained from your meeting today with the Secretary of State, and what would be the minimum?
Well, the minimum would be the fact of there having been a meeting. It's important. It's communication. It's happening for the first time, as you were saying, in 75 years. The ANC is known in this country, is known throughout the world. The ANC has been meeting heads of state all around the world, foreign ministers, numerous occasions. This and one or two countries were the exception, globally. So the fact of the meeting is itself important. The maximum, well, from our point of view, is really unattainable in terms of our demands. We don't expect to get everything we want. But let me say, the optimum position we would seek is that Secretary Schulz to say, now I understand about communism and violence. I now understand the matter better than I did before. This would be the best.
And many began to urge us. Frontline states began to say, Mozambique said, we've had to negotiate with South Africa. Maybe you better do the same. Tambo looks at this situation and in 1984 appoints a subcommittee headed by Paulo, with Simon Makana, with James Stewart and Tambo. And he says, comrades, study this question, is negotiations feasible? That set in motion a preparation before the issue of negotiations was real. So he laid the building blocks so that if anything was to happen, we must not be caught off guard.
O.R. Tambo was able to return to South Africa on the 13th of December 1990. Due to ill health, he passed the presidency of the ANC on to Nelson Mandela in 1991. The ANC created for him the special position of National Chairman. The Order of the Companions of O.R. Tambo is the highest honour made by South Africa to non-South Africans. In 2012, it was awarded to Brian Filling, Honorary Consul for South Africa in Scotland and Chair of the Nelson Mandela Scottish Memorial Foundation. Her Excellency, Nomathemba Tambo, is the High Commissioner for South Africa in the UK and a patron of the Nelson Mandela Scottish Memorial Foundation. And she is also the daughter of O.R. Tambo.
The most important thing that I learned from my father is that you must never sit still for injustice. It doesn't matter, it could be someone jumping in front of someone else in a queue. Don't keep quiet. Because when you start to get used to keeping quiet, you'll never open your mouth.
A statue of Nelson Mandela in Nelson Mandela Place, Glasgow, and an education project.
I thank you for the fact that you have raised so much money towards putting up a statue of former President Nelson Mandela in Glasgow. The significance of this statue cannot be overstated. The links between the African National Congress, the Liberation Organization of South Africa, and the people of Glasgow through the AAM can also not be treated lightly. It is a relationship that has endured for decades, and a relationship that I know will continue well into the future.
A permanent memorial to Nelson Mandela will not only remind Scots of their proud history of solidarity with the South African people, but it will also educate future generations on the need to stand up against racism and prejudice wherever and whenever it rears its ugly head.
In these times, it has never been more important to keep our history of fighting inequality and racism alive for this generation and generations to come. You can be part of that. See us on Facebook and Twitter, pledge your support and donate at mandelascottishmemorial.org.